I was 62 years old when I realized my son and his wife saw me not as a mother, but as a heavily discounted ATM that came with free maid service. My name is Barbara. When my husband passed away 5 years ago, he left me a comfortable life. The house was fully paid off. The savings were solid, and I had my quiet routines. But 2 years ago, my son, Mark, and his wife, Sarah, asked to move in. They pitched it as a temporary arrangement to save for a down payment on their own place. I loved my son, and I genuinely wanted to help them build their future. So I cleared out the guest rooms and welcomed them. It didn't take long for the dynamic to shift. It was subtle at first. Sarah would casually reorganize my kitchen cabinets, moving my favorite coffee mugs to the top shelf where I couldn't reach them. Then, she started adjusting the thermostat, complaining that my preferred temperature was ruining her skin. Mark, who had always preferred the path of least resistance, simply shrugged and told me to let her have her way. He hated conflict more than he respected boundaries. I never cried about it. Tears don't solve practical problems. Instead, I started paying very close attention to how they operated. They weren't saving for a house. I saw the daily packages arriving, the weekend getaways, the premium car leases. They were using my home to subsidize a lifestyle they couldn't afford. The tipping point happened on a Tuesday. Sarah walked into the kitchen, dropping a shiny brochure on the marble counter I had paid for. She announced she had gotten a promotion at her marketing firm and wanted to host a massive celebration dinner. She looked at me, a calculated smile on her face, and casually mentioned how wonderful it would be if I handled the reservations. I knew exactly what that meant. I was expected to open my wallet. I nodded, picked up the brochure, and realized my temporary roommates had overstayed their welcome. Sarah didn't just want a dinner, she wanted an event. She demanded a reservation at the Willow Room, a place known for imported steaks, extensive wine lists, and a strict dress code. She invited 25 of her friends, her parents, and a few of Mark's colleagues. Make sure you put your card on file when you book. Barbara. Sarah had called out over her shoulder as she headed out for a nail appointment. They need a deposit for parties over 20. I didn't argue. I didn't sit them down for a long, exhausting conversation about respect or finances. I simply walked into my home office, locked the door, and opened my laptop. For 2 years, I had been paying the property taxes, the water bill, the electricity, the premium internet, and even the grocery deliveries that Sarah ordered directly from her phone using my saved credit card. I started clicking. I removed my credit card from the grocery delivery app. I logged into my bank account and quietly transferred my primary funds to a new account at a completely different bank, leaving only a modest amount in the one Mark had emergency access to. I didn't throw a fit or demand gratitude. I just fundamentally changed the infrastructure of our living arrangement without saying a word. Later that evening, Mark came home and tossed his keys on the table. He asked if the restaurant was booked. I handed him the confirmation printout. He barely looked at it before retreating to the living room to play video games. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask if the cost of feeding 30 people was a burden. He just assumed I would absorb the impact. Exactly as I always had. I watched him from the hallway, feeling a profound sense of clarity. The dinner was set for Friday, and I was going to make sure it was a night they would never forget. Friday morning arrived, and Sarah treated me like her personal assistant. She handed me a list of errands before she left for work: pick up her dry cleaning, collect the custom cake she ordered, and buy a specific brand of sparkling water for her to drink while getting ready. I took the list, put on my coat, and drove into town. I did exactly what she asked. I picked up the dress, secured the 3-tier cake, and bought the water. But I also made a few stops that weren't on her list. My first stop was my phone carrier. I sat with a young representative and calmly removed Mark and Sarah from my family plan. They would receive a text message at exactly 8 p.m. letting them know their service was suspended unless they set up their own billing. My next stop was the auto insurance office. I signed the paperwork to remove both of their luxury cars from my policy, effective at midnight. Finally, I met my older daughter, Chloe, for a quick coffee. Chloe lived across town, had her own career, and had never asked me for a dime. She knew exactly what Mark and Sarah were doing and had been begging me to kick them out for a year. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Chloe asked, stirring her black coffee. "I can just go over there right now and tell them to pack their bags. You don't have to put up with this dinner." "No," I replied, taking a sip of my tea. "If we just kick them out, Mark will play the victim and Sarah will twist the story. I want them to experience the reality of their own choices. Just make sure you get to the restaurant by 8:30. Chloe smiled, a sharp, knowing look in her eyes. I wouldn't miss it. I finished my tea, gathered my things, and headed home to drop off Sarah's dry cleaning. The stage was set. I arrived at the Willow Room at 7 o'clock. The main dining area was stunning, with low ambient lighting, heavy oak tables, and the low hum of expensive conversations. Sarah and Mark were already there, greeting guests like royalty holding court. Sarah wore the dress I had picked up that morning. I walked over to the large main table, which was beautifully set for 30 people. I looked for my place card. I walked around the entire perimeter of the table, reading the names. Sarah's parents were seated next to Mark. Her friends took up the center. My name wasn't there. Sarah noticed me standing there. She walked over, holding a glass of champagne, flanked by two of her friends. She didn't look embarrassed. In fact, she looked triumphant. "Oh, Barbara," Sarah said, her voice loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "I totally miscounted the seats when I did the arrangement. We're completely full here." She pointed toward the back of the restaurant, near the swinging doors of the kitchen. "Mom, find another table. This one's for family." Her friends giggled softly, trying to hide their amusement behind their drinks. I looked at Mark. He was standing just a few feet away, entirely engrossed in a conversation about golf, actively pretending he didn't see or hear what his wife was doing to his mother. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't raise my voice or demand respect. I simply looked at Sarah, gave her a polite nod, and walked to the small two-top table in the back corner. The waiter, a young man who looked deeply apologetic, brought me a menu. I sat perfectly upright, ordered a ribeye steak, a side of truffle asparagus, and a glass of their most expensive Cabernet. I watched from the shadows as they toasted, laughed, and celebrated on my dime. I ate my dinner in peace, knowing exactly what was coming. The dinner dragged on for 2 hours. I watched plate after plate of imported seafood and prime cuts of meat land on the main table. The wine flowed freely. Sarah stood up twice to give speeches about her hard work, her independence, and the life she and Mark were building together. By 8:45, the plates were cleared, and the custom cake was sliced. I had already finished my meal and was quietly sipping my water. That's when the head waiter approached the main table, holding a sleek black leather folder. He leaned in and whispered something to Mark. Sarah laughed, waving a hand dismissively. She pointed directly across the room at me, sitting by the kitchen doors. "Oh, don't give that to us," she said loudly, making sure her friends heard. "Give it to her. She's handling it." More laughter rippled across the table. The waiter looked mortified. He walked slowly across the dining room, his face flushed, and placed the black folder on my small table. I am so sorry, ma'am, he mumbled. It's quite all right, I said calmly. I opened the folder. The total was exactly $3,270.45. I took out my credit card, placed it on top of the receipt, and handed it back to him. When he returned, I signed the slip and added a generous 20% tip because none of this was his fault. I slid the receipt into my purse and stood up, smoothing my jacket. I looked over at the main table. Sarah was smirking, whispering something to her mother. Mark was finally looking at me, a brief flash of relief on his face that the bill was settled. I took one step toward the exit. Then, a voice rang out from the entrance behind me, clear and sharp enough to cut through the restaurant's chatter. Just a moment, please. Everyone at the main table turned. Chloe walked into the dining room. She wasn't dressed for a party. She was wearing her work trench coat and carrying a thick leather tote bag. She walked right past the hostess and stopped in the middle of the floor, looking directly at Mark and Sarah. "Chloe," Mark said, his voice tight. "You're late. We already ate." "I didn't come to eat." "Mark," Chloe said. She walked over to my small table, looked at the empty dessert plate, and then looked at the massive setup across the room. She didn't yell. She just projected her voice, clearly. "I see you made Mom sit by the kitchen, and I'm guessing she just paid the bill for your little party." "Keep your voice down," Sarah hissed, her polite mask slipping. "This is a private event." "No, it's a sponsored event," Chloe shot back. "Sponsored by the woman you couldn't even give a seat to." Mark stood up, trying to look authoritative. "Chloe, stop. Mom offered to help. It's not a big deal." I placed a gentle hand on Chloe's arm. "It's fine." "Chloe," I said, my voice entirely steady. I walked toward the main table. The guests were dead silent, watching us. I stopped right in front of Mark and Sarah. I didn't look angry. I felt lighter than I had in 2 years. "I did pay the bill," I said, looking at Sarah. "Consider it a graduation gift. Because as of tonight, your free ride is over." I reached into my purse and pulled out a standard manila envelope. I placed it gently on the table, right next to Sarah's half-empty champagne glass. "I brought some reading material for you. Mark." Mark stared at the envelope like it was a live wire. "What is this?" "Mom." "Just the mail," I said pleasantly. "But it's important you read it now." Hesitantly, Mark opened the flap and slid the papers out. I didn't need to look at them to know what they were. The top sheet was the confirmation from the phone company. "Your cell phones will stop working in about 10 minutes. I explained to the silent table. "I took you off my plan. The next page is the auto insurance cancellation. You shouldn't drive home tonight. You're technically uninsured as of midnight." Sarah's face went pale. "You can't do that without telling us." "I just did," I replied. I pointed to the third document in Mark's hand. "That is the utility transfer form. The electricity, water, and internet for the house are now in your name. You'll need to set up direct debit by Monday, or they'll shut it all off." "Mom, why are you doing this?" Mark stammered, looking around at his wife's friends, who were now awkwardly staring at their laps. "We live together. You pay the bills. We save for the house. That was the deal. The deal was that you were family," I said. "But Sarah made it very clear tonight that I am not family. I am just the help. And the help just quit." I pointed to the final piece of paper in his hand. It wasn't a legal threat. It was a printed receipt from a local property management company. "What is this?" Mark asked, his voice shaking. That, I said, is the management agreement I signed on Tuesday. I hired an agency to rent out my house. A nice family of 4 is moving in on the 1st of the month. Sarah stood up so fast. Her chair scraped loudly against the wood floor. You rented the house. Our house. My house. Sarah, I corrected her gently. The one with my name on the deed. You two never signed a lease, which means you are simply month-to-month guests. The property manager will be there on Monday to do a walkthrough. You have exactly 2 weeks to pack your things. Where are we supposed to go? Mark asked, his voice cracking. The bravado he had shown all night had completely evaporated. I imagine, with Sarah's big promotion, you'll have no trouble qualifying for an apartment, I said. Since you've supposedly been saving your money for 2 years? Sarah looked terrified. I knew exactly why. They hadn't saved a dime. Every paycheck they earned went to designer clothes, vacations, and expensive dinners. They had built an illusion of wealth entirely on my foundation. And I was simply pulling my foundation away. You can't just leave us with nothing, Sarah said, her voice trembling. It takes 30 days to evict someone. I know my rights. I'm not evicting you, Sarah, I said smoothly. I'm just moving out and renting my property. If you want to stay, you can sign a lease with the management company. The market rate is $4,500 a month, plus a 2-month security deposit. If you can afford it, the house is yours. I knew they couldn't. I turned away from the table, grabbed my coat, and walked toward the exit. Chloe walked right beside me, a satisfied smile on her face. I didn't look back. The crisp night air hit my face as Chloe and I walked to her car. Before I could open the passenger door, the restaurant doors flew open. Mark came jogging out, his tie loosened, looking frantic. Mom, wait! He called out. I paused, resting my hand on the car door. Chloe stood next to me, arms crossed. Mom, please. Mark panted, stopping a few feet away. Sarah is crying in the bathroom. Her parents are furious. You completely humiliated us in front of everyone. I didn't humiliate you. Mark, I said calmly, I just handed you your own bills. If paying your own way is humiliating, that is a problem you need to solve. We don't have the money for a deposit on a new place right now, he admitted, looking at the pavement. We just need a few more months. Just let us stay until the end of the year. I'll make sure Sarah treats you better. No, I said. It was a complete sentence. Mom, we're family. You told me the main table was for family, I reminded him. I'm just finding my own table. My movers came this afternoon while you were getting ready. My bedroom is empty. I've leased a nice, quiet condo on the east side. Mark looked devastated, realizing that this wasn't a bluff. There was no argument to be won because I wasn't fighting. I was just leaving. Good night. Mark, I said. I got into Chloe's car and closed the door. As we drove away, I looked in the side mirror and saw him standing alone in the parking lot, holding the manila envelope. 3 months later, I sat on the balcony of my new condo, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea. The sun was shining, and my space was completely my own. There were no missing coffee mugs, no thermostat wars, and no ungrateful roommates. The transition had been seamless. The property management company handled Mark and Sarah's exit. When faced with paying the $4,500 monthly rent or leaving, they quietly packed their things. Without my financial buffer, reality hit them hard. Chloe told me they had to rent a cramped 2-bedroom apartment near the highway, and they had to sell one of their luxury cars just to cover the security deposit. Mark called me twice in the first month. The first time was to complain about how unfair the property manager was being about cleaning fees. I politely told him to read his contract and hung up. The second time was to ask if I wanted to come over for dinner. I declined. I wasn't interested in fake reconciliations or returning to a dynamic that required me to shrink myself. I didn't hate them. I didn't sit around wishing them ill. I simply removed myself from their equation. I took a sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I opened a book I had been meaning to read, enjoying the absolute, uninterrupted silence of my own home. I had finally found my table, and the seat was exactly where I wanted it to be. Love might be unconditional, but access to your peace, your resources, and your daily life must always require respect. Looking back at Barbara's journey, the most profound takeaway isn't about getting revenge. It's about the quiet power of detachment. We often feel pressured to argue, explain, or fight for our place at the table when we are being undervalued by the people we love. We mistakenly believe that setting boundaries requires loud confrontations or dramatic ultimatums. But true empowerment often looks exactly like what Barbara did, simply accepting reality for what it is and quietly adjusting your own actions. It reminds us that we don't have to endlessly participate in dynamics that diminish us. Stepping back and cutting off access doesn't make you a bad parent or a selfish person. It makes you a self-respecting one. You cannot control how others choose to treat you, but you always maintain absolute authority over what you choose to tolerate. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to simply stop paying for the privilege of being disrespected.